This is the paper pattern I used to make the passport holder. You can find a link to it in the video description. I started by roughly cutting out each of the pattern pieces from the 3 pages. This is the python leather that I use for the interior and exterior of the holder. This snakeskin piece was around 2.5 meters long. I had to use the middle section, which was the widest part of the skin. I used a rotary knife to trim the snakeskin using the paper pattern as a guide. The snakeskin was only 0.3 millimeters thick, making it perfect to use for rolling edges. It was a bit flimsy, so it did require some backing to help firm it up. This next material was the lining leather, which is a black pigskin leather. It was also very thin at only 0.5 millimeters thick. I roughly trimmed it to size using the paper pattern as a guide. Finally was the Salamander Salpa bonded leather, which I use for the core material. It was very thin at only 0.4 millimeters, but it can help to firm up the snakeskin. This time I stuck the paper pattern to the Salpa with scotch tape before trimming. These sections needed to be trimmed exactly according to design, including the center cutout. These were all of the parts of the holder ready to be assembled. I started with the middle panel by applying contact cement to both the lining and core material, and then stuck them together. I then used Salpa as a guide to cut the black lining leather to be the same as the pattern on the outside and on the inside cutout. The next step was to apply the snakeskin exterior onto this middle section. Again, I applied contact cement to both the Salpa core material and the snakeskin, then stuck them together and applied pressure to bond them. I then used a 3D printed guide to help trim off the excess snakeskin around the perimeter of this holder. This gave a uniform 6 millimeters of snakeskin to turn over the edge. I then applied more contact cement around the edges. And after it dried, I started to carefully turn and fold the snakeskin over the lining leather, moving carefully around the corners. I used a similar method for the center cutout, but this time I needed to divide the snakeskin around the inside corners before being able to turn the inside edges. I then hammered all the turned edges to flatten them out as much as possible. This was the completed middle panel of the project. The next part of the passport holder was the 2 inside pockets. I used the same method as before and stuck the Salpa to the lining leather, and then used it as a guide to trim off the excess lining. Then I stuck the Salpa onto the snakeskin exterior and trimmed a 6 millimeter border around the perimeter. I then folded and turned the edge, going around the border of the pockets, and then hammered down all of the turned edges flat. For a finishing touch, I applied my maker's stamp by hot pressing a gold foil onto the edge of the right side pocket. With the 2 pockets complete, I could then join them to the middle panel by first applying contact cement to each piece of leather, and then carefully stuck on the 2 pockets, being careful to align the corners and edges. I then marked in the center stitching line of the left side pocket, and used my crimson hide irons to punch in a row of stitching holes. The thread that I used for this project was this Chinois Lin Cable in 432 size. It is a linen thread that is 0.63 millimeters thick. I then rubbed beeswax on the threads and saddle stitch the stitching line using harness needles. To end the stitching line, I cut the threads and added a dab of white glue to help lock the thread in place. This was the inside panel completed. The last section of the passport holder was the exterior. I used the same method as the previous sections with the 3 different layers of inner lining, reinforcing salpa, and a snakeskin on the outside. After turning the edges and then hammering them down, I applied my maker's stamp using gold foil, this time onto the front corner, which completed the exterior section. With the interior and exterior sections complete, I could then start the final assembly. I decided to punch holes to the 2 halves separately to get neater stitching. After marking in a 3mm offset stitching line around the border, I punched in the stitching holes again using my Japanese style crimson hide pricking irons, making sure that the holes of each half were matching. I then applied contact cement to both sections around the edges, and then carefully stuck the 2 sections together, being careful to align the corners and edges. Then I used my stitching pony to hold the project while saddle stitching to stitch a single long stitching line around the border. I used my normal saddle stitching method, which you can find steps for in my other tutorial videos. To complete the stitching, I cut the threads and then added a dab of white glue and pushed the tips of the threads back into their holes with an awl to hide them. I then hammered down on all of the threads, which helps to close up the stitching holes. This was the completed passport holder. I really like how it turned out, especially with how the pattern on the interior looks consistent across the pockets. I have some more exotic leather projects coming up, so make sure that you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss them. And if you enjoyed the video, please like and comment. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.